because it's human drivers. Nobody can ever be as consistent as a machine. So sooner or later you sort of bump it a bit, or it's Monday morning, you drop the pallet, or the forklifts run into each other or ran too fast around the corner. With automation, you have basically computer control over everything, so you decide how fast or where to go or etc. You would never, for instance, run into a wall or anything like that. If people only look at labor saving, I think they're missing half of the story, really. If you do 10 an hour, that's 20 grand of material you move every hour. If you say that 0.5% of that is somehow damaged, that cost, it doesn't sound like much, but that adds up quickly over time.
Today I'm sitting down with Tommy Hessler. Tommy is the CEO and co-founder of America in Motion. He started his mobile robotics career back in 1986 at NDC Technology in Australia. Tommy has dedicated his entire career to the mobile robotics and AGV sectors. Welcome to Getting Traction with Mobile Robots, the podcast for manufacturers, operation leaders, and engineers looking for real results from automation. Whether you're exploring AGVs for the first time or already running mobile robots, this show is about traction and what actually moves the needle. Not just buying equipment, but understanding and utilizing automation effectively so it delivers step improvements rather than slow progress over time. Without further ado, we're going to dive in. So when companies look at how much automation can save them, they're often focused in on labor. So today you want to talk more about the hidden costs which come in through damages. So our focus today is damages. So Tommy, when we think of manual material handling versus AGVs, what really are some of the damages? I think of off the top of my head, forklifts running into the building. I mean, that's what I think of when I think of damages, but I'm guessing there's more to the story here. So what do you mean when you say damages? That is something that we're going to be taking a look at.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think first to answer, I want to sort of paint the picture or set the stage so it's understood. And if you think about buying a car today, people look at gas mileage or they buy electric cars, and there's an awful lot of understanding and statistics in what you're buying, and even a payback on I'm paying for what gas, so I should do this and so forth, right? So it's a very, I call it educated buyer in general. If I then swap over to mobile automation, a lot of people are not very educated. It's kind of like buying a car in 1932, and who cares about gas mileage or seat belts or a lot of things. And it doesn't mean it's bad, it's just it doesn't evolve as much. So the first thing to think about is that if people only look at labor savings as the reason for even doing this, I think they're missing half of the story, really, because there is safety, for instance. That's a much safer environment. Damage applies, as you pointed out, both to the equipment, the building and so on, but also what you actually transport is the biggest part of all, because there you have either a pallet or a bundle or whatever the load might be moving. It's worth at least $1,000 or $2,000. And if you do 10 an hour, that's 20 grand of material you move every hour. And if you estimate that 0.5% of that is somehow damaged when you manually bump into things or ship to the wrong area or whatever, that cost, it doesn't sound like much, but that adds up quickly over time, especially when you have multiple vehicles and so forth. So that's sort of the more, I call it, modern way of looking at it. And I see some customers are very much up to speed, and they don't even look at the labor cost anymore. They just look at that. So you can kind of think of damage as a more modern way of looking at automation. Take into account all the aspects. We still haven't gotten to things like safety is in there, but I don't know that there's a number associated with it. Or some, depending on the industry, sometimes when you ship things, they go to the wrong place. What's that worth? Like if you're Amazon, for instance, I'm sure you ship the wrong pack. What does it cost you to ship the right one? And there is some cost that will, because the computers doing this, generally they're not like humans. They do what you tell them, so it will do exactly what you say and never make a mistake that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of the things I mean. So it's a bit more than running into the building, but it's a more modern way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And just kind of getting the big picture beyond damages and labor. I know you shared this graphic with me ahead of time. This is kind of getting a big picture of, everything that goes into the total cost breakdown. And that's often not what every every customer's looking at. They might just be looking at the labor and the maintenance, but obviously the green and red in this graph are providing quite a bit. So do you have anything else you want to add specifically to this graph?
Yeah, this graph shows you the payback that it can be, in this example, less than a year, even if you take into account the yellow parts is the labor, which is a traditional way. And in this example, based on I think $2,000 load or so, you can see how the green, being the reduction in damage, that's a very small part of it, is pretty much the same or even more of the value than the labor. And then the red on top is when you have an error shipping the wrong product or sending it to the wrong place or any sort of data errors type of thing. Right? And you can see that it makes a huge difference. It's even more than labor. And if you don't recognize it at all, that means you will only lose the bottom part of the graph, and now your payback is probably 2 or 3 years or something. And that means financially people say, oh, let's not do it then. And you don't improve it because you looked at only part of the picture, and to me made a sort of an uneducated decision saying it's not worth it. But in reality, there is always some damage. Even if you're on a pallet in a box and so on, it's never zero. Just put a small number then. But look at the whole picture and you can see what it actually means.
Yeah, that makes sense. The importance of looking at the big picture. Why do you think damages are so easy to overlook?
It's not what a lot of companies measure. It depends on the industry. We've had, like, prior to the paper industry was a huge AGV or mobile robotics user, and their whole justification was only on reduction in damage from something like about 3 or 4% to have the auto wrapper that they take off. And they took it down to like under 1% with automation because it handles it more gently and so forth. And that difference, that was enough to pay for the system in about a year or so. So they didn't even look at labor, which of course was in there too, right? But so it depends a lot on the industry. And it's, if you ship things on a pallet, then maybe things go wrong, but it's hard to measure and where does it happen and so forth. So people just don't have the data, so they ignore it in their thinking basically. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? I have example of textile industry where they have a spinning operation, and initially they never measured how much material you put into the operation and how much comes out. You just expect it to be the same, but it's not. So we actually put in an automation system with a scale in it, so you weighed how much they put into the process, and then also on the way out, and to their complete surprise, there is a difference. And where did it go? What happened? And how much damage? And they realized, whoa, it's leaking here. We never even knew there was a leak, so to speak. And then they could do something about it and measure it over time, and it just made the whole operation much more modern, not only automated, but also the way people think about it and so forth, right? Again, and parallel to the gas mileage of the car. And if you don't even measure it, you don't know how good or bad it is, right? And if you stop measuring it, you can do something about it and look at the cars today, right? So it's how it evolves, basically.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And that's such a valuable story firsthand of, being able to measure and see, oh my gosh, we're losing product. And that's money that's just pretty much seeping out. So sometimes damages are seen as just like the cost of doing business. But how do AGVs change the game?
They change it in that you find a way to handle it consistently and in a gentler way. So therefore damage goes down. But on top of that, you can add devices to actually measure it so you know what it is and see how much it is. So you can fix sort of two problems. You may be able to measure it as people run it today. And then you're halfway there at least, you know how much it will mean. And then look at ways so consistently and without ever, shall we say, straying off the path or driving into a wall or something like that, that will just not happen anymore. Even the building itself you're running in is part of it as well, not only what you carry. So I don't think cost of doing business, it's like saying I'm driving a car from 1932 and a gas mileage is just the cost of driving. What's your problem? And that's not very educated, but yeah, you could have that attitude for sure.
Yeah. I was going to say that makes complete sense. So how does manual material handling create damage variability?
It's because it's human drivers. It's nobody can ever be as consistent as a machine. So sooner or later you sort of bump it a bit, or it's Monday morning, you drop the pallet, or two forklifts run into each other or ran too fast around the corner. With automation, you have basically computer control over everything. So you decide how fast or where they go or etc. So you would never, for instance, run into a wall or anything like that. So it's a very different way. On top of that, they also, of course, have sensors all around. So, for example, if you drive too fast coming up towards something, the sensor on top of that will see it and override and slow down the whole vehicle. So it's really hard to create damage with a system like that.
Yeah, it just creates consistent flow. You can even have operations running when there's no one there. It's just it enters a whole new ball game as far as the consistency of an operation.
Yeah. I can imagine in the future when we all have self-driving cars now, you would sit in the back seat, go faster, I'm in a hurry, and it doesn't do anything. It stays safe, and it's kind of like that, right?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And Tommy, you've touched on this a little bit, and I know this episode's focused on damages, but can you kind of touch on safety, predictability, pollution, anything else that might be a game changer as far as manual to AGVs?
Yeah, it depends on the application, but we can start with, let's just call it pollution. Some forklifts are still diesel powered and so on, while these are electric vehicles, so they're very environmental and so forth. That may or may not apply everywhere because a lot of forklifts are electric today, right? The second is noise pollution. These things are very quiet. There is no combustion engine or noise in any way like that. So that's another way it makes it, shall we say, more pleasant environment to work in. And also, you can think of the vehicles that they don't necessarily need lights or an environment where if it's dusty or whatever, you can have the machine go in there and not people. So it makes the whole work environment better depending on the application a lot as well. Essentially, they can do the boring task, I call it, that take things from A to B in a safe manner without people having to do it. So people go and do smarter tasks than that, right?
Yeah.
Add value. And I think that's the future for any company. Even our company name is America in Motion. That's why we have that name, to make companies here in America more efficient and work smarter, not harder, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And on the safety, I could say also, like I mentioned before, the vehicles would stop and they have onboard sensors. And on top of that, you can program whatever speed you want anywhere in the plant. And there also you can have lights and gates. So if there's a pedestrian crossing, just like an intersection with traffic, it will, be kind of like a driver of a car that would never break a single rule ever. That's sort of how my Volvo rover is, right? We can set up how you want it and so on. We've had systems where, for instance, when there's a shift change that's at a certain time of day, we send out a signal and all the vehicles stop so that people can walk anywhere they want. And then when the shift change is over, we start again. So you can kind of tailor it to suit you the best you want. Right? It's a machine that's very obedient, but you have to tell it what to do.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I know some people kind of have them, under the wrong impression that AGVs or mobile robots are just going to take over their job. And it sounds like it's not that they're taking over the job. It's just doing more of the mundane tasks to free up our minds for other, more tasks that can create more, As I said, do you have anything else to add there?
No, I guess the movie The Terminator didn't help us much because there was not enough or at all, right? But in real life, you control them. You decide what you want them to do, right? It's not they're taking over anything. You govern everything they do in detail, including if there's an issue that's unexpected, how do they react? What do they do? Do they stop and wait for an operator? Do they take it somewhere to say, here's a faulty part and so on? So there's the sky's the limit. I can also say, you can think of other things than just moving material from A to B, like assembly lines, for instance. You have assembly lines that are like Henry Ford or style in a line, right? And if you use the AGVs, they don't have to be in a line. You can more think of it like bees going to flowers in whatever order you want. So you can change the whole way you set up your plant, and the assembly line is no longer a line, it's all over the place. And these will travel in between. And you can have instructions on them, so as they arrive, the operator will get them instruction as to what to do, and feedback QA after they've done their operation as well, and all that's collected. It's a computer on wheels, right? So that's the way to change thinking about assembly operations as an example, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's just a whole next level of efficiency right there. So.
Yeah. That's actually how AGV started with Volvo, I don't want to say they're started because they've been trials from the 1950s or whatever, but they were more, should we say, a laboratory experiment where they somehow moved and they didn't know why, kind of thing. But there's serious in the industrial sense. There was Volvo on the east coast of Sweden. They did 260 vehicles. That's sort of the first real one, which is a lot of vehicles that back then they were so primitive they were following a wire in the floor. But they laid out their whole plan differently, so they had work cells that drove into, and the operator would do what they needed to, and then it left the work cell and the next one came in, instead of the traditional assembly line type approach, right? And it ran, I think, 35 years or something, had QA and everything in it. So you just think about it like a computer on wheels is the best way I can say it. If you have a computer on wheels, what can you do with it? Well, how can it help you? And that sky's the limit pretty much, right?
Yeah, I was getting right to say that.
Yeah, there's even mobile automation in rides, so where you can go for entertainment purposes. It takes you around and gives you an experience. So there's so many places you can go.
Yeah, and it's just continuing to grow every day.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, if someone is looking to quantify damages in their operation, what should they do to assess in order to kind of get like a big picture view? Or do you have anything that they can kind of go home with or go to work with, I guess, as far?
Yeah, I would say that look at first throughput as a guide. And if you have sort of 1 or 2 loads an hour up to a few hundred, then you're in the right range. If you have 10,000 loads an hour, a conveyor makes more sense. They would have some vehicles with almost a conveyor anyway, right? So sort of 1 to 2 up to a few hundred loads an hour is probably a good rule of thumb, I would say. And also, if you have multiple shifts of operation, it's much easier to justify than single shift. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but you can just tailor the application to see if you can really have, say, 1 vehicle on the single shift, you could justify. If you want multiple vehicles and do more, 2 shifts help.
Yeah, that makes sense. And and how should they assess for damages? Should they like be doing specific calculations? Should they put in a general number? Like, how can they get a sense of the damages?
Yeah, you can almost do that in your head if you think the value of whatever load is. You think of that, and then say that just presume something if you don't know what it is. Let's say it's 1% damage, just to say something. Yeah. And then you know it's 10 loads an hour, they're worth so much, and you multiply it out and say how much is it per hour, per month, per year. That's what you should look at, really, and see how many dollars that would be. And then you can say, no, it's not 1%, maybe it's 0.5%, and change it accordingly. But get a feel for it is a good way to start. And then if you think it's interesting, then dive into the details and really get into what it actually would be and make some good presumptions, and then you can see if more automation makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's good, actionable, get the ball rolling steps. So when you take a step back, what's truly at stake if a company ignores damages?
That often means that it's back to my driving a car and who cares about gas mileage. And that often means that if you have, let's say, 2 or 3 year payback, the financial people will only see that and say, oh, it's not worth it. We have other places we can spend the money. And you end up doing nothing. So there's no improvement because you only looked at part of the picture. Yeah. And that's the drawback. So there are a lot of ways of doing nothing in life, right? This is one of them. What can I say?
Yeah, that's fair. That's sweet, simple, to the point. Tommy, before we wrap up today, is there anything as far as damages that you would like to add in order to help the audience better understand a big picture of damages and how it feeds into the equation of mobile robots?
No, I'd say we captured most of it here. I just think talk to your financial decision makers too, so they understand because they also want to have the best choice, right? And they really look at the information, and if you don't have exact data, presume something reasonable just to get an idea of what the dollars are, and then you can see if you should dive into it and really spend some time on it or not, right? But get to the big picture really quickly is lower level, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Tommy. I appreciate having you on today. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to episode 2 of Getting Traction with Mobile Robots, where I dig into AGVs. I talk to experts to try to get you the information so you can become smarter buyers and understand the systems more. So we will have several more episodes in the series coming up. If you have something you'd like us to talk about specifically, please submit the form below. We will also provide resources after every episode to help take you to the next step. So if this episode in particular grabbed your attention, you want to know more about damages, what you can do, what Tommy's talking about as far as like, now let's apply this, please check out our resources. We are here to help you. So thank you guys again. Stay tuned for the next episode, which will be coming out in 2 weeks. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Emily. Been a pleasure. See you later.
Thanks, Tommy.